Few things are more frustrating to a man than when his woman is emotional. By its nature, it defies logic and rationality. And even if you know what you should do, according to the relationship books, sometimes it goes so directly against the male nature that it just feels wrong. So you might end up escalating situations that really don't need to be. So in this video, rather than just give a checklist of things to do, I want to get really into the inner workings of these situations so that you can finally just get it. So next time your woman's emotional, which is going to happen eventually, instead of getting stressed by it or even seeing it as a problem, it can be seen as a little opportunity for both her and the relationship to be more of what you want, to have more love, more devotion, more fun. So firstly, you have to recognize that when she's emotional, she is not an adult woman anymore. You have to see her as a little girl. Now, feminists might not like hearing this. They might say, oh, you're infantilizing her. It does run counter to the consumerist culture we have where everyone is seen as exactly equal and symmetrical. But the man-woman relationship is actually an asymmetrical relationship. And it's also totally unfair to treat an emotional woman like a rational adult. It's an unfair way to measure a person because, of course, she's going to score poorly on that metric. Women become irrationally emotional every so often, specifically in intimate relationships, for a very good reason. It is a test because if a woman ends up in any kind of intimacy with a man, there's a very good chance she's going to end up with a baby. Not only is this incredibly physically vulnerable, but in order to raise a child or arguably any human social unit, be it a relationship or a tribe or a family or a nation, there's going to be external functions and there's going to be internal functions. Because the thing is, no human being can have their focus on both the external and the internal at the same time. And when we look at the things that women inherently do in the intimacy process, it actually takes away from her ability to be a woman if she has to focus on the outside. Because we know that if a woman has to be too externally focused, she's too concerned with time, she's worried about money, she has to be concerned about whether the physical space is secure, she is less able to do those inward feminine processes. Like she might have a harder time orgasming, she might have a harder time conceiving, she might have pregnancy or birth issues, and even just the general mothering nature. Being nurturing to her children or to her partner or to her home becomes harder when she also has to focus on the outside world, which is why entering this both physically and emotionally vulnerable state, she wants to test the man to make sure that he's willing and able to handle the external world, handle the perimeter. Now, testing your ability probably happened more in the earlier part of the courtship process. Chances are she would have never opened her legs or opened her heart to you if she really saw you as incompetent. But the thing is that the testing doesn't stop. It just changes. If anything, the higher you score in her eyes on the ability sense, the more competent, the more attractive she sees you, the even more she has to test your willingness to be there for her. Because if she sees you as more attractive, if she respects you more, she knows that other women find you more attractive too, which is a threat, which means she has to constantly test to make sure that you will choose to stick around with her when she's pregnant with your child. You will choose to go through the hard and maybe less fun and rewarding parts of being with a woman when she's in that situation that she can't get out of. So you'll hear women say things like, I just want you to feel me, or I just want to know I have an effect on my partner, which essentially translates to, will this man continue to care for me when we're in the stages of relationship that are not so easy anymore, such as having a baby? So she drops into little girl mode to test if the perimeter is solid. He has an insecure reaction and drops into little boy mode, who is seeking the approval of the proverbial mother. So he has his insecure reaction, be it an avoidant reaction or an anxious reaction. I'll differentiate the two in a moment, which proves to her the perimeter isn't solid. So her little girl becomes even more emotional, even more loud to really basically yell, hey, is the perimeter secure? Which of course further triggers the little boy, so on and so forth. Things get worse and worse and worse. To avoid this negative feedback loop, instead of becoming a little boy, you have to essentially become the daddy. This means responding securely. It means recognizing, okay, she is literally in an altered state of consciousness. She is not the adult woman that she normally is in the relationship. I need to treat her that way. I need to recognize that, she's in this world where she's feeling these things and perceiving these things, maybe deep in things that seem like delusions to me, and recognize this is just where she's at, and she needs me to be the secure father figure that the whole test is trying to figure out whether or not you are. So unless you're perfectly secure, chances are you've had the little boy insecure reaction in the past. And as mentioned, there's two forms of this. There's the anxious response and there's the avoidant response. If you're in anxious insecure mode, Chances are you're empathizing too much or empathizing the wrong way, actually. Essentially, you've become the little boy who will do anything for mommy's approval. She seems upset. The approval's gone, so you'll do anything to get it back. You don't even know why she's upset. You'll just modify your behavior in any way to make the upset stop. This, of course, doesn't work because you're essentially failing on the ability front. You're showing her that you don't have a solid perimeter because you can't possibly hold a solid perimeter and need her approval at the same time. If you have the avoidant response, then either you fire back at her with anger, maybe try to punish her essentially for having emotions because your little boy is like, why are you yelling at me? Like, I didn't do anything. Or you do, which what is my tendency typically, which is to go cold. You're like, all right, well, there's nothing for me to do here. I'm going to let her deal with her emotions on her own. Both of these avoidant responses fail on the willingness front. It basically tells her that you're not going to stick around when she's in need of you, so she better form her own perimeter. And of course, when a woman forms her own perimeter emotionally, she's no longer within yours. She's no longer intimate with you. You're no longer a cohesive bond. If anything, you're two people who just share space. Chances are you've had both kinds of insecure responses at some point. Thankfully, there is a solution to each one. Real quick, I wanted to share that if you're going through some relationship troubles right now, be it something related to this or some other unwanted pattern, or even if it seems like you guys might break up, I can help. I've helped, I don't know how many hundreds of people unfuck their relationships. I've mostly worked with people one-on-one, but I've recently decided to restructure my program so that you can include your partner as well. Information's at rwando.com/relationship. And my goal is not to be a couples counselor. It's not to have people in therapy sessions for months and months and months. I actually decided not to charge per session. My goal is to bring the relationship to peace, harmony, and love as quickly as possible, to solve the problem as quickly as possible. If you hired me to fix a leak in your roof, we don't want it to take months and months and months. It might take some time, but we want things to be fixed as quickly as possible. So I've aligned the incentives to be that way. And I'm even offering a guarantee where if a year from now, the patterns reemerge, you backslide into old ways, if the leak starts leaking again, I'm still going to be there. If you're interested, you can apply at rwando.com/relationship. Link is in the description as well. So first, the solution for the anxious response. And this is actually something that I recommend to everybody, especially any guy who's having doubts in his relationship and he's not sure if he should pull the plug or not. I tell them to first determine what your clear boundaries are for the relationship as a whole. Like basically the dark thought that most people in a relationship don't want to ever think about is what would cause me to leave? Like what is the hard no that if this and this happened, if she did this or if he did this, like that's just a final straw. And a lot of people don't want to think about this because, it seems like to have this negative thought might send you in a bad direction, but it's actually really important to know where this hard boundary is for you to feel peace within them. And it's for you, but it's also for her, right? There's a lot of studies that when children are playing or left to play in a big open fields, they actually feel very anxious and they end up huddling next to a tree because they don't know where the safe boundary is. Whereas if you put a fence around their play area, even a really wide fence, they'll play all the way up to the fence because they know what's safe and what's not safe. There's a very clear literal perimeter. And when a woman is testing in little girl mode, she's actually testing specifically to find out where exactly the fence is. And if a guy's having an anxious response, he's constantly moving the fence away or the fence isn't very clear. So she actually feels more crazy. I had a client where his partner wasn't that crazy. I mean, she was a normal amount of emotional in the beginning, but because he had an anxious response, she kept upping it, right? And over a year, she actually became like really unreasonable, doing things that were really far out there where I think most men would have been like, okay, this is just too much. But since he always had this kind of watery response where he was always trying to make her feel better and do whatever he could to acquiesce, she actually just upped it and upped and upped it, becoming more crazy and crazy and crazy because she wanted to know what was going to be his limit. What was the point where he was going to basically be like, here, you cannot go past this line. And only when he finally put up a hard boundary, a hard no, which unfortunately happened when things were already pretty dire, did she finally relax. Like she just wanted to know where his boundary was. And on your side of the equation, knowing where your hard boundaries are also allows you to relax because if you don't know where your boundaries are, what your limits are, you're kind of like those little kids in the open field where everything seems triggering, everything makes you upset. You're not really sure if things should go further or not, so you're quick to become defensive. Once you clarify this for yourself, you'll probably find that your hard boundaries, your hard limits are probably a lot further out than her behavior. So I'll speak for myself. Like a lot of the times that I've gotten unnecessarily butthurt or, defensive in a relationship argument is because I didn't actually know where the limit was. But when I recognize, okay, as long as she's not lying, she's not blatantly disrespecting any of those kind of obvious things, and she's just, being unpleasant right now, it's actually not that big a deal. And I could have more compassion and peace. Whereas if it ever came close to that limit, we would enter it basically when we were touching the warning track. I wouldn't have to be angry either. It'd be like, okay, well, if you go past this line, I'm going to have to leave. But we've never actually come that close, right? Like, you have to define it for yourself so you're not defensive unnecessarily. And then there are the micro boundaries within interaction, like how you expect to be treated even when she's upset, such as you can have your emotions, but do not blame me for such and such, or do not try to shame me for such and such. And if she does, then the response is, I'm going to go somewhere else. And this is a totally reasonable thing, right? It's giving her the space to behave however she wants to behave, giving her the freedom, but also being clear in yourself of what your response is to certain things. Like, you're not going to stay and be berated by someone. And being clear in this too is also a different way of being compassionate. And the hard thing here, especially for an anxious type, is to be okay with her feeling bad, right? Of course, you want to be a supportive partner, but it's okay for a woman to be upset. It's okay for a little girl to be upset. Only from little boy mode do you feel like it's your responsibility to always make sure she's happy. And again, this goes back to being the secure daddy. It's like, I do tell my clients sometimes, think of your partner as if she's your daughter for this moment, right? If she was whining for ice cream or whining for some other thing that she really wants, she thinks she really wants, but is not good for her and is not okay with you for whatever reason, it's okay to say no to her. You're not doing her any favors by acquiescing to her every need. And I do get it too, because I think all of us have a little bit of anxious and avoidant in us. Like, nobody's perfectly secure. And I'll even say with my literal daughter, especially early on, there were times where, because she was crying, I kind of felt like I just wanted the crying to stop, and I would do anything to just make the crying stop, which isn't me being a secure father, right? It's me kind of trying to avoid the discomfort, which is not how you want to be as a parent. It's not how you want to be as a man. So just remember, she needs your love, not your servitude. Servitude does not help her. Servitude does not make her feel more secure or feel better. She needs her love, which sometimes means holding up the boundary for her. And the flip side of this is that you do need her respect, but you don't need her approval, right? You say no to a little kid, sometimes they're not going to like you for it, but in the long run, they will actually respect you for it and actually will be more safe and secure in their being because they know where the boundaries are. Which brings us to the avoidant insecure response. If your typical response is, I shouldn't have to deal with this, or why are you being emotional around me, or why are you being upset? There's no reason to be upset. This is probably you. And the first thing I would say is recognizing that, one, as the perimeter setter, as the man, as the masculine in the relationship, it is your role. It is an asymmetrical role where she gives you power, she gives you authority in the relationship, in the family, in exchange for the fact that you take care of her. This is actually, and also, whether or not you decide to have children, this is where all the fun parts of women come out. Like when she really feels safe and secure and cared for by a man she respects and sees as strong, that's where all the great things come out, whether it's in the bedroom or the loving, nurturing side or the sweet feminine side that all men inherently want. And the second thing is her test, if you're really seeing it as, okay, she's dropped into little girl mode to test my manhood, to test the perimeter. And this is a thing that I need to remind myself all the time, is it's going to pass a lot faster than if you obviously have the anxious response or have the avoidant response. Like if you tell her to deal with it herself or feel like it's not your business or that she should just, grow up, that doesn't secure her, and that only makes the little girl yell louder. So I have a little bit more to say on this because this is my personal tendency when I'm not responding securely. And there is a narrative in me sometimes of like, I don't want to reward bad behavior, right? She's acting unreasonably, even though I know she just needs some love, she needs a hug, she needs attention, and she needs to be heard. There is something in me, which of course does come from my own little boy insecurity of like, I don't want to reward her because she's going to be worse next time. But this is actually the opposite of what's true. But the solution to this is recognizing that you can still love the person while disapproving the behavior. It's very similar to the parent-child relationship in this instance, where what they need is love. They don't need servitude. They don't need to be beaten. They need love. Even though you're maybe modifying behavior through reward and punishment in some way, the person needs love. And the more she feels loved, the more she will naturally be that person that's a lot more pleasant to be around, the less reason she would have to test you. Which brings us to our final piece of creating that positive feedback loop rather than the negative feedback loop where she becomes a little girl, you go into little boy mode, you're basically having your insecure defensive reactions at each other. Instead, when she tests, which will happen, she goes into little girl mode, you respond with secure father mode, being the daddy. It inspires her to get out of little girl mode. And then you have this positive feedback loop where you're being the more loving, sexy, pleasant, harmonious selves to each other. And the more you can give positive feedback, the more you can fill her up in the good times, the less likely she'll have to test you in the uncomfortable times. Because just remember, the masculine role is to be responsible for the external reality, to be responsible for the perimeter. That is your job. And that's also what men are interested in doing, right? Fixing things, dealing with the outside world, dealing with numbers, dealing with time and space and material reality. Whereas all the things that are inherently feminine, the things that are rewarding for a woman in relationship are inward. The surrender, the joy, the feeling, the nurturing, all the sexy stuff too. And that can only come when you are really securing the perimeter on the outside. So even though it can seem like when a woman's emotional, you as a man are not equipped for the situation, it actually does not have to be that way. If you look at things correctly, secure the perimeter, avoid the negative feedback loops, and be the daddy. Because everybody wants a daddy. Goodbye.